Before he was one of the great basketball players of all time, Charles Barkley was a native-born son of the Alabama soil. He went back to his home state in recent weeks in order to campaign hard for Doug Jones, the Democratic candidate from the Senate who is widely considered an underdog, at least until his opponent, Republican senatorial candidate Roy Moore, revealed more and more aspects of his extraordinarily bizarre, retrograde, and racist personality. Now, of course, Doug Jones pulled off an upset victory last week, and I want to tell you what Charles Barkley had to say moments after his victory was announced. He said this, among other things, on CNN. He said, "This is a wake-up call for Democrats. I told Mr. Jones this, and I love Doug. They've taken the black vote and the poor vote for granted for a long time. It's time for them to get off their ass." Again, I quote Charles Barkley, "It's time for them to get off their ass and start making life better for black folks and people who are poor. They've always had our votes, and they have abused our votes." He went on to say, "This is a wake-up call for Democrats to do better for black people and poor white people." Now, Mr. Barkley makes a lot of sense there, and I wish more professional Democrats were thinking the way he's thinking, but they were not nearly as insightful. In the wake of Doug Jones's election, you know, a centrist/corporate Democrat will always have one answer to any situation, whether the news is good or bad, whether the candidate has won or lost. The answer is always more corporate centrism. Now, they've been saying that about Doug Jones's victory, and we'll talk about that for a second. First of all, Charles Barkley is right when he says that black voters played a critical role in Jones's victory. Without them, we would now be facing the prospect of an accused pedophile and someone who is nostalgic for the days of slavery taking a seat in the United States Senate. They rescued us from that, as did other Alabama voters, to which I say thank you. But now, did they vote for Doug Jones because he represented the institutional Democratic Party, or did they vote against Roy Moore? A clue can be found in the reporting of Washington Post journalist Eugene Scott, who wrote the following: "More than 24 black voters here," and by here he means Birmingham, Alabama, "said they did not feel inspired to show up for a candidate who they felt did not aggressively pursue their vote. They were moved to wait in line, some people for hours, with the goal of keeping Moore from winning." Now, that's certainly an understandable emotion on their part. The defrocked judge, Roy Moore, commented that the last time America was great was, quote, "at the time when families were united, even though we had slavery, they cared for one another." Now, of course, slavery separated family after family, and in a horrific ongoing human tragedy. He also said that he thought that all constitutional amendments after the 10th Amendment should be repealed. Now, that includes the 13th Amendment outlawing slavery and the 14th Amendment guaranteeing citizenship and equal rights for former slaves and their defendants. So this guy was one retrograde piece of work. Now, African-American voters, like others, were aware of the well-documented claims that Roy Moore sexually abused teenage girls, and undoubtedly heard his bigoted remarks against Muslims and Jews. Now, can we count on the Republican Party nominating an entire national slate of accused pedophiles and pro-slavery advocates who are also religious bigots? I would argue we cannot count on that kind of luck, which means that Democrats, once again, will need to offer an affirmative agenda for the American people, including the very African-American and poor white people that Charles Barkley mentions. It is very much a wake-up call that you cannot count on this kind of luck next time around. Now, just for reference, Democrats, more than 40 Americans are still living in poverty, according to the Census Bureau. In fact, the United States has a higher rate of poverty than any other Western developed country. Get on that, guys, the next time you're in power. Philip Alston, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, recently told a reporter in Alabama that that state's sewage disposal conditions were the worst he'd ever seen in a developed country. Now, residents there, as AL.com reported, often fall ill with ailments like E. coli and hookworm, a disease of extreme poverty long eradicated in other parts of the country, in part because they do not have consistently reliable access to clean drinking water that has not been tainted by raw sewage and other contaminants. Now, that is true in the so-called Black Belt of Alabama, named for the color of the soil. How long can Democrats count on to be rescued by the very people our government is failing? Now, I could go on and detail all the Democratic centrist pundits on CNN and elsewhere who got this one wrong, claiming that this was a victory for centrism, smearing people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, who are trying to do something about this shameful state of affairs. But let's look at it this way. Let us keep the message simple. Democrats need to understand that their popularity ratings are at a 25-year low. Also, by the way, dropped by 13 points just this year alone among black women. They need to do something other than hope for good luck or manna to fall from the heavens. Democrats need to offer an affirmative agenda for change. Until they do, their future, and therefore ours, is in peril.